أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين المظلومين المنتخبين والذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والسولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردوية والجود التقوية والنقاوة النقوية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم هو الذي خلقكم من طين ثم قضى أجلا وأجل مسمى عنده ثم أنتم تمترون صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatu Zahra, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To give the Imam of our time our condolences as we approach the Arba'een of his grandfather, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the unique features of man is that he is able to go beyond this material realm of his experience and ask questions which are related to a dimension that is higher. And based upon that, we find that there are certain questions which are universal and mankind has been asking since the onset. And amongst those questions that regardless of what society you go to or what time period you reside in, is the question pertaining to death and the nature of the realm beyond. That's why when we look across different philosophical schools of thought and we look around different faith systems, everyone has offered some form or another of insight into this question of what lies beyond this realm. Whether it was the philosophers of ancient Greece, whether it was the Stoics of ancient Rome, whether it was the theologians of medieval Europe, or whether it is the intellectuals of today, everyone has offered some sort of insight into this question. For example, when you look at an individual like Socrates or Socrates, when he was asked about death, he would say that death is the separation of the soul from the body. And the function of the soul is to understand. Thus, anyone who wants to understand the truth, they have to go through death, so the soul is not limited. You find this was one understanding. Another individual who lived in ancient Greece gave a completely opposite understanding by the name of Epicurus. Epicurus, he said that obviously you and I have not experienced death. And if we have not experienced death, then we do not know about it. And if we do not know about it, then we do not have the right to speak about it. You see that this is a completely opposite understanding, but it is still a form of an insight. You know, when you go farther, there was an individual in ancient Rome by the name of Cicero. Cicero, he said that when a person dies, Either there is a hereafter or there is nothing. If there is a hereafter, then you are going towards your destination. And if there is nothing, then at that situation, at the very minimum, your pain is ended. So in this regard, you find different individuals have approached this question in different manners. That's why those individuals who examine the topic of death, some of them examined it historically, that what are the historical viewpoints towards death. Others analyzed it from the examination of anthropology, that what are the different rights that human communities they give towards a person who has died. But then others have offered a deeper insight. That is why when you come to the world's religious traditions, the world's religious traditions have offered an answer on death which is not found in any other branch of study. Why? Because there are many things in our aqaid and our belief we can rationally understand. Rationally, we can establish the wujud and the existence of Allah. And we can establish the necessity of the prophets and the imams. But can you rationally establish what will happen after death? No, in this endeavor, we are dependent on the source material, on the text, on wahi, on revelation. And in that regard, when you come to Islam and the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, you find that there is a very profound understanding of death which is offered. As in when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, when the Imam says, Wallahi, labnu Abi Talib anasu bil maut min at-tifli bitadya ummihi, that by Allah, the son of Abu Talib is more familiar with death than a child is with the bosom of its mother. This goes to show that this individual has a profound understanding of death. And in reality, a person who has such an understanding, only that individual at the moment of his death can say, Fustu wa Rabbil Kaaba, that by the Lord of the Kaaba, I have become successful. You see, when we look at one of the qualities of the ashab of Imam al-Hussein, and many of the fadail and the virtues of Ahlul Bayt in general, they stem from the fact that these individuals understood death, and because they understood it, they did not fear it like you and I. When Rasulullah on the day of Khaybar, he describes Amir al-Mu'mineen, what does he say? He says, La u'tiyanna rayata ghadan rajulan karraran wa ghayra farrarin. That tomorrow I am giving the alam to a man who is brave, he doesn't run away. An individual can only be karrar and ghayra farrar when that individual has a comfort with the concept of death. No further than that, when we look on the day of Ashura, in Biharul Anwar, there is a rajaz, a battlefield poetry which is ascribed to Abu Fadl Abbas. And in that line, Abu Fadl Abbas alayhi salam, he says, La arhabul maut idal mautu raka. That I do not fear death when death it approaches. Hatta owari bil masaliti laka. Even if I am covered under the swords, I do not fear death. Nafsi li nafsil Mustafa at-tahr waka. My soul is for the soul of Rasulullah, for those who are chosen. Inni anal Abbas aghdu bisaka. So you find in these lines, Abu Fadl Abbas, he demonstrates his comfort with death. And that is why when it comes to this question of why mankind fears death, at the first level, we recognize that the fear of death is something which is natural. But at the second level, there are one of two reasons why one may be consumed by this fear. The first of those reasons is that they do not understand the mahiyya, the quiddity, the reality of death. And in this regard, there is a tradition of Imam Ali al-Hadi, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, where the Imam demonstrates that one of the causes of an excessive fear of death is not understanding it. You see, there was one companion of the Imam who was ill. And when he was ill, the Imam noticed that there was a great amount of worry upon his face. So the Imam says to him that, why are you worried? He says that my illness may lead to death, thus I am worried. In other words, the fear of death was more painful than the illness in and of itself. The Imam in this narration, he demonstrates that if a person has a proper concept of death, at one level, the fear of death can be minimized. Even though it is natural, it is still there, it is minimized from one level. So the Imam says to that individual, "O man, if there was a pond and you washed yourself in that pond many times a day, what would happen?" The man said, "I would become clean." The Imam says this is the reality of death for a believer. Death is a process which is purifying the mu'min at that moment. So you find at one level, a proper concept is something which goes a long way in reducing this fear. But at the second level, you find an individual fears death. Why? They fear death because of the life that they lived. You know, the Quran in Surah Al-Jum'ah, in chapter 62, verses 6 and 7, it says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ هَادُوا إِن زَعَمْتُ أَوْلِيَاءُ لِلَّهِ مِن دُونِ النَّاسِ فَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. The Quran says, "O Prophet, say to the Jews that if you think you are the chosen ones of Allah, then the sign of being the chosen ones of Allah is that you desire death. وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْنَهُ أَبَدًا بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ." But the reason they will never desire death is because of what their hands have sent forth. In other words, because of their deeds. That these individuals, they lived a life of hypocrisy. They lived a life where they knowingly went against the command of Allah. And because of that, you find that they will always remain in a state of death, because that is that moment when the reality has become clear. That's why when you look in the Quran, you find the Quran time and time again, in numerous verses, has referred to the concept of death and reminded mankind of his mortality. But there is one verse of the Quran which approaches death in relation to predestination and free will. And it presents an aspect of death which is not found in other verses, because it approaches the question that when it comes to our lifespan, how long we live, does the human being have any free will in this regard, or is it completely predestined by Allah? And that verse is Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, verse number 2. Over here within this verse, Allah, He says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن طِينٍ, that Allah has created you from clay. ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا, then after that He has decreed an end for you. وَأَجَلٌ مُسَمَّى إِنْدَهُ. The Quran over here in this ayat, it does something very interesting. At the first level, it says Allah has decreed an end for you. But then it says there is another end which is known to Allah, ثُمَّ أَنْتُمْ تَمْتَرُونَ, but you remain in a state of doubt. The question of analysis in tonight's majlis is, why does the Quran say that there is one death which has been decreed and there is one death which is known by Allah? Does this mean that there are two lifespans which are potential for mankind? Or does this mean that there is one lifespan? And we'll examine this topic under the basis of this ayat. Now, when it comes to this ayat, the first thing that this verse it mentions is هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ. That if we are going to come towards the topic of death, the first thing that it mentions is that Allah is the creator of humankind. And Allah is the Khaliq. Over here, the question that one needs to understand is that can we use the word Khaliq and creator for anyone other than Allah? You see, when you look in the Quran and you go to Surah Al Imran, chapter 3, verse 14, there is a quotation from the Prophet Jesus, Nabi Isa. And over there in that quotation, Nabi Isa alayhi salam says, أَنِّي أَخْلُقُ لَكُم مِّنَ الطِّينِ كَحَيَّةِ الطَّيْرِ فَأَنْفُقُ فِيهِ فَيَكُونُ طَيْرًا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. He says, أَنِّي أَخْلُقُ, that I am creating from this clay the form of that bird. And when I breathe into that bird will become real by the permission of Allah. Over here in this ayat, Nabi Isa uses the verb from which the word khalq, it stems from creation. So you find zahiran, from the apparent level, the Quran seems to imply that there are other individuals who have the quality of khalq and creation. Now I'll give you another example. Suratul Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse 14. In that verse, Allah, He mentions the stages of the creation of the human body. And after He mentions those stages, He says, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. That free from defects is Allah, the best of creators. The word khaliqeen is used in the jam'a and the plural. So this outwardly once again applies that the word creator can be applied to other individuals. You see, over here, the realization that we need to have is that there is a discussion of adab and etiquette when you approach Allah and the deen of Allah. And what I mean by this is that even though certain verbs at the realm of action can be implied to other individuals, the noun we reserve for Allah. Yes, other individuals may be able to create, but we reserve the word khaliq out of etiquette for Allah. But no, at the second level, there are certain qualities which at the level of the verb and the fi'l, it says that Allah carries it out. But we do not use those qualities when we call Allah. And I'll give you an example. Surah Al Imran, chapter 3, verse 54. وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. You know, makar in the Arabic language is a type of plot which is carried out away from the eyes of those who can see it. Something which is carried out in secrecy. The Quran is saying that you may plot, but Allah also plots, and Allah is the best of plotters. In dua Joshan al-Kabir, any other dua which has the names of Allah, have you ever heard anyone say Ya Makir? We don't say Ya Makir because it is outside of the realm of adab. And the key point that I'm approaching towards is that when it comes to calling Allah, the sifat of Allah, His names and His attributes, we call Allah in the way Allah has described Himself. And that is that reality. You know, in the modern world, in this whole world of gender debate, people, they ask that why does the Quran say huwa for Allah? Qul huwallahu ahad. That He, Allah, has no partners. The first level of the answer is that in the Arabic language, there is only a masculine and a feminine. When it comes to English, you have a masculine, you have a feminine, and you have a neuter gender. The neuter gender is neither male or female. But many of the Eastern languages, particularly those that stem from Aramaic, you find that they have a male and a female only. So when we say Allah is He, we are not saying that He is He in the form of gender. It is a figurative usage. But the second reason we use the word He for Allah is because Allah in the Quran has described Himself with the word Huwa. And when we call Allah, it is the realm of adab that we call Him in the way that He has described Himself. In the same way, when it comes to Ahlul Bayt or the Prophet, there is a particular etiquette with which you approach. You see, the beauty of the ziyarat literature and the visitation literature is that the visitation literature says to us that we understand that you are our lovers. But the peak of ishq is that when you come on our ziyarat, you address us in the way that we have taught you for us to be addressed. You see, many people, they ask that what is the reality of Karbala? Once one begins to examine the ziyarat literature, you do not see the reality of Karbala and the fadail of Ahlul Bayt from any zakir and orator. But it is the imams of Ahlul Bayt who are explaining the fadail of Ahlul Bayt within the ziyarat. That's why Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, he says to his companion by the name of Mufaddal, that, O Mufaddal, إِذَا أَتَيْتَ قَبْرَ الْحُسَيْنِ فَقُفْ بِالْبَابِ وَقُلْ هَذِهِ الْكَلِمَةِ. That, O Mufaddal, that when you go to the grave of Imam al-Hussein, stop over there and say these words, O Mufaddal. And then he says, فَإِنَّ لَكَ بِكُلِّ كَلِمَةٍ كِفْلًا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. And O Mufaddal, if you recite our ziyarat in the way that we have given to you, for every word you recite, there is a portion of the rahmah and the mercy of Allah. So you find over here, the first thing that this verse does is that it reminds us of etiquette and adab. And this adab starts by, at the highest level, by addressing Allah, and it continues when we address Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt as well. But then after that it says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ مِنْ طِينٍ. That substance with which God created mankind from is clay. Teen is made of turab and ma. That dust and water, when they come together, they make clay. You know, there are many narrations which imply that that clay which one is created from has an impact upon our mizaj, upon our natural inclinations and de-inclinations. And I'll give you an example. Because if we are going to understand this, we need to examine that if clay is made of dust and water, does the Quran say all forms of water are the same? Or does the Quran say that there are different forms of water? That is why when you go to Surah Al-Fatir, chapter 35, verse 12, Allah says over here, هَذَا أَدْبٌ فُرَاتٌ سَائِغٌ شَرَابُهُ وَهَذَا مِلْحٌ أُجَاجٌ. The Quran is saying that there is one type of water which is sweet, pleasant for the one who drinks it. But then there is another type of water which is salty and it is bitter. So the Quran is showing that when it comes to water, there is not all of the same type. And if the type of water differs, then the teen and that clay differs as well. Now at the second level, the question is that if it is made from water and turab, from the earth, are all forms of the earth the same or do they differ? And over here we find that there is a verse of the Quran in Surah Al-A'raf in chapter 7. It says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. That blessed land, the plant and the vegetation comes out of it by the permission of Allah abundantly. وَالَّذِي خَبُوتَ لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِيدًا. That which is land which is devoid, it is a land which does not have nutrient, you find that the plant, it comes out of it very sparsely. You know, this ayat was actually used by Imam al-Hassan in a conversation with Muawiyah. You know, Muawiyah, he looks at Imam al-Hassan, and it was the habit of Imam al-Hassan that he would keep a heavy beard. And Muawiyah was an individual who would have a very light beard. So he says to Hassan, he says Imam al-Hassan to him that, why is it that you keep it heavy? And Imam al-Hassan, he replies by using this ayat as a demonstration of who Ahlul Bayt are. He says that land which is tayyib, that land which is pure abundance comes from it. And that land which is devoid, nothing comes from it. In other words, he says to Muawiyah, O Muawiyah, we are that pure land. That from this household, one after another, you find that abundance and kathrat is coming. Because we are from that household which is the misdaq of Kawthar within the Quran. And you are from that household, one after another, you find people who are devoid of any values. So you find over here, the Quran is showing that in the way water is of different types, you find that earth is of different types. That is why there is a very famous narration within the school of Ahlul Bayt, which has been quoted from the 6th Imam alayhi salam, where the Imam says, Inna shi'atana khuliku min fadli tinatina. That our Shia have been created from that leftover clay which has been used to create us. Now over here from this question, from this narration, a question arises. Does this mean that everything in our life is predestined? Does that mean that we are predestined to stay upon the school of Ahlul Bayt? You find the reality is this, is that what this ayat of the Quran is referring to, and what these narrations refer to, is that everyone when he is created, he has a unique mizaj and a constitution. And based upon that mizaj, you find that there are certain things that you excel in, and there are certain things which are outside of your realm of expertise. You know, there's a very famous narration that a man from Syria, he comes to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And when he comes to Imam al-Sadiq, you find that he had a number of questions about a number of different subjects. Imam al-Sadiq said to him that discuss with my companions, and if my ashab are not able to answer you, then I will give you the answer. So you find the man says, my question is in relation to Arabic grammar. The Imam says, if you have questions about Arabic grammar, go to Humran. He says, now I have a question about fiqh. The Imam says, if your question is about fiqh, then go to Zurara. The man says, I have questions about theology. He says, if you have questions about theology, then go to Hisham ibn Salim. He says, I have questions about akhlaq. He says, go to Hamza at-Tayyar. He says, I have questions about imamat. He says, go to Hisham ibn Abdul Hakam. Hisham ibn al-Hakam. So what the Imam is showing is that each of these different individuals, based upon their mizaj, they were able to excel in a certain area. That's why even when it comes to our communities, there may be certain individuals who are excellent at organizing the community. There are certain individuals who are excellent at serving in other manners. It is not that one manner is better than the other, but in reality, it is that mizaj, and based upon that, there is a personalized experience through which one can excel. And you find time and time again, we see this in the seerah of the companions of Ahlul Bayt. Because some of these companions, their seerah outwardly, it contradicts itself. You know, you've heard of the companion by the name of Ali ibn Yaqteen. Ali ibn Yaqteen was a Sunni. And he comes to the school of Ahlul Bayt. He was an individual who was a part of the Abbasid government. So he comes to the Imam and he says to the Imam, that Imam al-Rida, that should I remain a part of the government? The Imam says, remain over there. You find this is one level. But then there was another individual. That individual, you find that his title was Al-Jammal. A Jamal, a person who would have many camels and he would give out his camels. It's stated that Harun al-Rashid rents a camel from this individual, but he doesn't pay him up front. So Imam al-Qadim, when he sees him, he says to him that I heard that you rented your camel to Harun al-Rashid. He says yes. Then he said to him that has Harun paid you or not paid you? He says that Harun hasn't paid me. He says that, do you wish that he remains alive so that when he comes on his journey, he pays you what is yours? The companion says, yes, I wish that he's alive. The Imam says, what type of individual are you that you are wishing that a zalim and oppressor remains alive? You see, Zahiran, this is very different than the seerah of Ali ibn Yaqteen. No, even in the companions of Rasulullah, Salman takes a governor position in Madain under the second caliph. But Abu Dhar al-Ghafari is the one who would stand in front of the palaces of the Khulafa and he would say, these individuals who hoard the gold and the silver. So you find the point that comes up after the first point of Khaliqiyya is that this thing which Allah has created from you has a profound impact upon your mizaj and upon your nature. But after Allah mentions this, then he comes to the crux of the analysis. He says, ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا وَأَجَلٌ مُسَمَّى إِنْدَهُ, that Allah has decreed an endpoint for you, but then there is a known endpoint which remains with Allah. You see, one of the names of death is Ajal. And the word Ajal, literally in the Arabic language, means when a contract comes to an end. That's why in Surah Al-Qasas, in chapter 28, verse 28, it mentions the story of when Musa meets Shu'aib in Madain. And when Musa meets Shu'aib, Musa marries the daughter of Shu'aib under the condition that either he serves Shu'aib, he works for him for 8 years or 10 years. Chapter 28, verse 28, it says, ذَلِكَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ. This agreement is between me and you. أَيُّمَا الْأَجَلَيْنِ قَدَيْتُ فَلَا عُدْوَانَ عَلَيَّ. It uses the word ajal, and it says whichever of these ends that we choose, whether it is 8 or 10 years, There is no blame over me. You see, at one level, literally, the word ajal means an end. But when it comes in relation to the human being, obviously it signifies death. That's why Allah in Surah Al-Ankabut, in chapter 29, verse 5, it says, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ أَجَلَ اللَّهِ لَآتٍ. You see, this verse over here, it says those who desire to meet Allah, then indeed that death which Allah has decreed is coming. This ayat is showing that the true nature of death is that you meet Allah. That the first level of the ayat says those who desire to meet Allah, death is coming. In other words, these are two expressions for the same reality. You know, one of the titles of Nabi Ibrahim was Khalilullah. That Ibrahim was the friend of Allah. It's stated in one hadith that when Malakul Maut comes to Ibrahim, Malakul Maut says, "O Ibrahim, I have come to take your soul." Ibrahim says, "O Malakul Maut, go and tell Allah that have you ever seen a friend who desires for his friend to die?" That Ibrahim is Khalilullah. So when Malakul Maut returns to Allah, Malakul Maut says, "Oh Allah, this was the reply of Ibrahim." Allah says, "O Malakul Maut, go and tell Ibrahim, when have you seen a friend hesitate to meet his friend?" So you see in that reality, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ أَجَلَ اللَّهِ لَآتٍ. But over here in this ayat, it says that one death is there. Then one death is known by Allah. You know, anything which is with Allah, it does not undergo change. It is only within this world of movement that you have changes. But in the Zat of Allah, change is not over there. That's why the Quran says, "Ma indakum yanfad, wa ma indallahi baqin." That which is with you, it exhausts, it runs out, it changes. But that which is with Allah remains constant. The Quran over here is showing, O mankind, when it comes to your death, there is one death which has been written for you and it is known with Allah. But then there is one death which is decreed. That death which is decreed, you have the capacity, whether you bring it closer or whether you make it farther off. You know, when you look at our du'as, there is no dua which says, "Oh Allah, shorten my life." Every dua, it says, "Yatilu fil umar," that increase my life. The only exception is dua makarimul akhlaq, where Imam Zainul Abidin says that, "Oh Allah, if my life becomes a pasture for shaitan, then take my life." But every other dua is saying, "Oh Allah, increase my life." What this goes to show is that there is a level that when it comes to your death, that even here you have ikhtiyar. That's why there are many narrations from Ahlul Bayt which speak about how an individual can prolong his life. For example, one narration will say silatul rahim, that an individual, the stronger his ties with his family are, Allah increases the life of that individual to that death date which is with him that doesn't change. Another narration will say sadaqah and giving charity, for example. You know, one day Imam Zainul Abidin is seen in Medina, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And when he's seen in Medina, a man by the name of Johnny, he sees that the Imam has a bag upon his shoulder and there is something within the bag. So Johnny, he says to Imam Zainul Abidin that, "Are you going on a journey?" The Imam says, "Yes, I am going on a safar. I am going on a journey." So next day, Johnny, he sees Imam Zainul Abidin in Medina again. On his shoulder is a bag. Paraphrasing in my own words, he says that, "I thought you were going on a journey, but you are still in Medina." The Imam says, "Johnny, ana fi safar ila al-akhirah," that I am in a journey to the hereafter. And what is upon my bag is my material and my provision. You know, whenever anyone goes on a journey, they don't go empty-handed. Johnny says, "What do you mean?" He says, "This is that bread which I give to the fuqara of Medina." You know, Amir al-Mu'mineen gives a powerful example in Nahjul Balagha. He says that imagine, this isn't the exact quotation, but it is a paraphrasing of that narration. The Imam says that imagine that you're going on a travel. And as you are traveling, a man says that all of this luggage which is with you, I will carry it for you and I'll give it at your destination and I'll give you even more than you had. Is there anyone who wouldn't take that offer? At the first level, you don't have to carry the burden of this luggage. And at the second level, when you give to your destination, he'll give you even more. The Imam says this is the reality of sadaqah and charity when you give in the way of Allah. That sa'il and that faqir, he is carrying your luggage for the day of judgment. And when he returns it to you on the day of judgment, Allah will give you more than what you gave to that individual. So you find in this reality, sadaqah increases the life of an individual. And what all of these demonstrations, what all of these demonstrate is that, oh human being, dua has a powerful reality in your life. You know, many people, they ask that why couldn't Allah just decree one death date? That death date, it doesn't move at our level and it's the end of the discussion. If Allah decreed one day of death for you and that death cannot be moved, then you find what is the point of dua? Dua, it comes in, dua has a powerful impact. And you find in Islamic theology, we have the concept of bad'a. The concept of bad'a, it states that even though nothing changes in the knowledge of God, but at the level of enacting that command, God can change His decree. You know, there's a very interesting verse of the Quran. And that verse of the Quran, it describes the Jews. You see, the Jews of that time in their theology, they had a belief that when Allah decreed something, it was game over. Meaning your actions can't change your state, your du'as can't change your state, nothing can change you. And the Quran, it says, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ يَدُ اللَّهِ مَغْلُولَةٌ. That the Jews, they say the hands of Allah are tied. In other words, Allah has decreed it. Allah is tied, Allah is bound, Allah is limited by His decree. But the Quran, it says, after that, غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. It is not the hands of Allah which are tied, but rather you have tied yourself by your ideology. وَلُعِنُوا بِمَا قَالُوا. And la'nat is being sent upon you for what you used to say. بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ يُنْفِقُ كَيْفَ يَشَاءُ. But in reality, the hands of Allah always remain open. And when the hands of Allah remain open, Allah, He can give however He wants to give. So you find in the final analysis, the reality of death when it comes to the human being is that yes, at one level our death is decreed. But in a certain capacity, based upon the life we live, one is able to further off that date of death and the quality of his life, and one is able to bring it closer towards him as well. And you find that the most powerful description that this ayat it gives is that it says that this ajal and this end is the qada and the decree of Allah. You see, what did Imam al-Hussein say at the shahadat of his 6-month infant? He said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un وَرِضًا بِقَضَائِهِ وَتَسْلِيمًا لِأَمْرِهِ. That when it comes to the qada and the decree of Allah, I am pleased. And when it comes to the command of Allah, I have submitted. You see, many of the issues that we see in our lives and we see even in Islamic history is because individuals were not ready to submit to the decree of Allah. Whether that decree was a command or whether that decree was the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Because at the end of the day, the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt is in the realm of qada and decree. You know, you and I, even if we pray 1,000 units of prayer at night, we will not become Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's why the Imam says in Nahjul Balagha that on the day of Uhud, there were many individuals who were killed. But it was our uncle Hamza who became Sayyid al-Shuhada. And there were other individuals besides my brother Ja'far who were killed. But he is the one who became At-Tayyar. You see, if they had submitted to that decree of Allah, then things would have been easier for them. There's an interesting narration. It's quoted by Allam al-Hilli in a book called Minhajul Karama fi Ma'rifat al-Imama. And Allam al-Hilli, he quotes a Shafi'i jurist who wrote a book called Manaqib of Ahlul Bayt by the name of Ibn al-Maghazali. Ibn al-Maghazali, he states that one day Rasulullah was in Medina. And Rasulullah is in front of his companions. And as he's in front of his companions, they see that there is some sort of object in the sky, that there was a star which was falling, or there was a meteor, or some astronomical object. They began to say, "Oh Rasulullah, what is this?" Rasulullah doesn't answer. But Rasulullah says, wherever this object it falls, that individual will be my wasi. You find that the hadith Ibn al-Maghazali states, which Allam al-Hilli he quotes, he says that it falls at the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. The moment it falls at the door of Amir al-Mu'mineen, they began to say, "Ya Rasulullah, you have erred in your love for Ali. That you have gone beyond the bounds, that they could not accept the decree of Allah." The moment they said that, you find the ayat of the Quran were revealed. وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنْتَكُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, by the star and when it sets. Your companion has not made a mistake, nor has he erred. But when he speaks, it is of the revelation of Allah. And that is why when you look at this household of Ahlul Bayt, you see the greatness of this household is that they submitted at the highest of levels. If I told you that your day of death is this date, even if that date is 50 years from now, you're going to spend your life in worry. Because if that curtain is unveiled and you know the day you'll die, even if it's far off, you'll always think that that day is coming. But Imam al-Hussein is the one that Rasulullah told them that the day of Ashura is coming. And besides knowing the day of Ashura, what he'll have to give upon that day, Imam al-Hussein, he goes on that day and he says, "Allahumma anta thiqati fi kulli kar." That, "Oh Allah, in every hardship I rely on you. Wa anta raja'i fi kulli shidda." And you are my hope in every severity. And you find he gives that sacrifice on his day. And without a doubt, one of the greatest tragedies that the Imam was aware of was the tragedy of the women after the day of Ashura. Because it's stated that the moment the shahadat of Imam al-Hussein it happens, Imam al-Zaman and Ziyaratul Nahiya, he describes that moment when the horse of Imam al-Hussein, Dhul Jana, is returning to the tents. And he says, فَبَرَزْنَا مِنَ الْخُدُورِ نَاشِرَاتِ الشُّعُورِ عَلَى الْخُدُودِ لَاتِمَاتِ الْوُجُوهِ صَافِرَاتِ. That the women, when they see that Dhul Jana is coming, they step out of the tent and they begin to slap their faces at that moment. One narration, it says that the daughter of Imam al-Hussein, Sakina, when she sees the horse of her father, she goes to Zuljana. She says, "Hal suqiya abi ammata adshana." That, "O horse of my father, answer one question. That did they give water to my father? Or was he thirsty when they killed him?" Then after that, the order it comes to begin to burn the tents of the women of Ali Muhammad. That from one tent to another, the women, they would go. It's stated, Hamid ibn Muslim, he says, that as everyone was running away from the tent, I saw that there was one lady who was walking into a burning tent. And I said to myself that what must have she left? That who would walk into such a tent? He says that as I'm watching, a moment it comes that as she comes out of the tent, there was a young man upon the back of that lady. That on that night of Sham Ghariba, that Sayyida Zainab, she brings Imam Zainul Abidin upon her back. No, after that, you know the Masaib. You know, on the 11th of Muharram, Sayyida Zainab, she says to Shimar, "Oh Shimar, do not take us in between the Maqtal and the battlefield, because these women, they cannot handle to see the bodies of their loved ones." But you know what Shimar, he does? He takes them through the battlefield, and as they go through the Maqtal, each of the women would go through the body of their beloved. That Layla would go to the body of Ali Akbar, and Ramla would go to the body of Qasim, and Kulthum would go to the body of Abbas. But it's stated that as each woman would go to the body of their children, of their beloved, Sayyida Zainab only goes to the body of her brother. And she says, "Oh my brother, I want to kiss you at this moment, but I don't know where. There is not a spot which is not covered in wounds." At that moment, she begins to recite lines of ziyarat, and she says, "Assalamu ala al-Husayn al-Madloom. Salam be upon my oppressed brother, al-Maqtul, al-Majru' al-Shana, the one who was thirsty when they wounded him, al-Madboom min al-Qafa fi yawmi Ashura." Then she says, "Salam be upon my brother, the one that when they cut his neck, they didn't cut it from the front of his neck. But when they cut the neck of Abu Abdullah, from the back of the neck they began to cut. Alladhi ghusluhu kadamahu, the one whose ghusl was done with his blood, and the one whose kafan was the khak of Karbala. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أيّ منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Ahlul Bayt, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, there are many who have requested du'as, many have hajat, many are in difficulty. Ya Allah, through these blessed days, Ya Allah, grant their hajat. Ya Allah, allow us to go and grant us the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein, in particular the ziyarah of Arba'een. Grant us the shafa'ah and the intercession of Imam al-Hussein on the Day of Judgment, and hasten the reappearance of the one who will avenge the blood of Imam al-Hussein, Matam al-Hussein.